Thank you for coming to the plenary session. And it looks at the role of purpose-driven technology to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Varun, and I'm reading for a DPhil in engineering science, and I've been given the opportunity to be the moderator of this remarkable panel, so I'm very lucky. In this complex and challenging landscape of global inequality, imagine a world where extreme poverty is a relic of the past, where sustainable energy powers our cities, where justice, equality, and sustainability are not just aspirations, but our daily reality. This vision aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which were set out in 2015 with a vision of global prosperity by 2030. We're about midway through that now. So today's panel will delve into how technology is key to achieving the SDGs, and it unites experts who apply technical-driven solutions to advance sustainable development. They will share their insights from nurturing startups to fostering grassroots innovation and deploying technology for positive global impact. On our panel today, we have Gina Lucarelli, who's the Accelerator Lab Network team leader at the United Nations Development Program, which is the largest and fastest growing network on sustainable development challenges. We have Hila Cohen, who is the deputy head of the UN World Food Program Innovation Accelerator that addresses zero hunger as well as the SDGs. We have Swati Mylavarapu, who is the co-founder of Insight.org, which provides catalytic capital and support for startups, nonprofits, civic organizations, and that work on some of the world's biggest challenges. And finally, we have Zikho Pali, who is the co-founder and COO of Quro Medical, a digital health company pioneering premium healthcare solutions for Africa and emerging markets. We'll have a 40-minute discussion followed by 20 minutes Q&A from the audience, so prepare your questions, and let's welcome our panelists. So to begin with, I'll start with a question for all the panelists. Why is it crucial to leverage technology with a purpose to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals? And how does your work align with this mission? So we'll start with Gina, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. So, I mean, if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, when you were reading that heartfelt, imagine a world, I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach. The truth is, right now, it's an all-hands-on-deck moment if we want to achieve those goals by 2030. We're at the halfway point. The COVID pandemic and its socioeconomic aftermath put a lot of goals behind schedule. Global poverty is rising for the first time in decades. If we're meant to eliminate extreme poverty, which is people living on $2.15 a day, best case scenario, we will be able to cut it by 30%. So all that is going on in the world, the choices that are being made, where we are now, we need everything. We certainly need technology. And if we want the Sustainable Development Goals to be this blueprint for, a better world today and tomorrow, I think we also need to think of them as like a research and development agenda. At this point, when you look at each of the Sustainable Development Goals, it's not a blueprint for how it will be achieved. It's an aspiration to which we need to employ experimentation, exploration, and all of the sort of things that go with technological development. In our work, so we have a network of social innovation labs that cover 115 countries, the majority of least developed countries, and I've been told I shouldn't call them small island developing states, but rather large ocean developing states. So we cover kind of a breadth of countries. What I've seen is the most kind of mature use case for using technology to advance the Sustainable Development Goals is when it comes to making the invisible visible. So helping to understand where we are with certain sustainable development problems. So we use satellite data, geospatial analytics, machine learning algorithms in some ways to look at waste management, to find clandestine waste dumping sites, to look at air pollution as well. Our lab in India worked with Nottingham University to use satellite data to zone in on some of the very harmful brick kilns that fuel the construction industry. They produce a lot of pollution. They're also hotspots for bonded and sometimes child labor. So they use the same algorithm that detects the difference in dog breeds to zone in on which of these would be most likely to be violating environmental regulations. And then they worked with the enforcement board to get about 1,000 of those shut down. And then they also worked to apply for loans to transition families who are relying on that for income for greener opportunities. So this is what I've seen in my work.
Amazing, thank you. And Hila?
I'm part of the United Nations World Food Program. We're one of the largest humanitarian actors in the world, and our goal is to feed people in crisis situations, whether they're affected by conflict, by climate change, and in many cases there are countries that are affected by both, which makes the situation of the peoples in these countries very, very, very severe. Today the numbers, there's 748 million hungry people around the planet. There's 345 million people that are with acute hunger. And that number is 200 million more than pre-COVID. So I think the topic of COVID is, we feel that it's past, but it's still affecting people today. And if we take also inflation, people are just getting poorer. And actually the people who grow our food, the smallholder farmers, are the ones who are affected in a very substantial manner. And that's why part of our focus is also helping many of the farmers who actually are helping to feed us, but they can't have a sustainable life themselves from their own food. And there's also a topic of female farmers, that even though they're the ones who are working the hardest on the farms, they don't have equitable access to finances and to other resources. So we address this in a number of ways. We're an innovation accelerator, and startups, NGOs, and WFP colleagues can apply to our program. We run innovation programs where you apply to our program. We match you, if it's a WFP program, to a WFP country office, so you're not a startup just working on your own. You work with us on the ground. You go through a 5 to 10 day boot camp. There's a pitch event, and then you can get funding from us up to $100,000 to implement with WFP. And then we also help you in your journey. We also have other programs on other SDGs that sometimes the ticket sizes are larger than $100,000. And our goal really is to be a bridge for startups that are solving the problems that we have. For example, there's a startup called Bhumitra that started in India. We're working now with them in Kenya. And they're taking the climate topic with smallholder farmers and creating a model for smallholder farmers to create regenerative agriculture, meaning agriculture where they diverse what they put as inputs, and then which is healthier for the soil, and then they also get carbon credits. And a startup like that maybe couldn't have imagined 10 years ago to work with the UN, and now we're that bridge in the case of our areas of work.
Great, thank you. And Swati?
Awesome. So Varun, your question was sort of broadly construed. Why is it important to use technology in pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, or if I could cast it even more broadly, to do good, to have impact? And I think my direct and pithy, if slightly controversial answer is because that is what separates technology for purely entertainment or science project value to actually mattering, to furthering the historical arc of how humanity has used technology in the best forms to improve our lots, to improve our chances. So I think for me, that's the first order thing, because it's the best and highest use and application of technology to help other people. But a second and more practical one is because we face more existential threats to humanity today than at any point before, including the greatest existential threat, climate change. And our ability to tackle those types of challenges will only occur at the speed and scale that we require if we leverage innovation and the transformative power of technology. But it all comes down to something that I think the warden alluded to in some of her opening remarks this morning on the first panel, which is technology in and of itself is not a force on its own. It is not a law of this world in the way that Newtonian physics is. They are tools that are wielded by people, and this is where the anthropologist and the sociologist in me comes out. The tale of our times is not AI and generative AI. It is how individual people make decisions about how to deploy that technology, where to create value, and how to help other people with it. It is a call for leadership. It is a call for people like you to make decisions about how we want to use those tools. That's the work that I do. I run a small philanthropic and investment fund called Insight. We look for opportunities to deploy capital into technologies with really great principled leaders behind them that have huge potential for impact. And it's a really big week for me in my work. On Thursday, when I was on a plane coming out here, some of you who are maybe a little bit more enmeshed in the climate change side of the SDGs might have noticed we had a world-breaking historical moment in the US, and it had very little to do with the wars that are happening or our politics. We had a plant in California that sequestered carbon from the air, captured it, and put it into cement for the very first time in human history. That was an idea that 8 years ago, my foundation made the very first grants into. It was a company started by an entrepreneur that I invested in twice. Funded by an American Secretary of Energy, who was a former grantee of mine, who put a first bet out there that energy policy in America could be a labor policy and could also be a technology and innovation policy. So that's the work that we do at Insight. We take radical bets on big ideas and really good people to use technology for better.
Amazing, thank you. And Zikho?
Thanks, Varun. I think a lot of what has been said definitely resonates. We heard earlier on that technology has the potential to solve pretty much every human problem. And I think just looking at the rate of progress on the SDGs and just the grave and urgent nature of the work that we are grappling with, I cannot see a justification for a failure or refusal to leverage this resource and pretty much every available resource to try and drive meaningful change. In terms of my own organization's work, we have pioneered South Africa and the continent's first technology-enabled hospital-at-home solution. And purely by bringing healthcare to where the patients are, which is their homes, we've managed to make healthcare, and in particular hospital-level care, more geographically and financially accessible to patients. In addition to that, by leveraging our technology and I guess removing all the typical constraints that come with a brick-and-mortar facility, we have been able to exponentially expand the capacity of doctors to care for patients simply by removing the barriers that come with a brick-and-mortar facility. But we go beyond, I guess, even video conferencing, even though we have the capabilities to offer that. Through our technology, doctors are able to monitor all of the physiological parameters that would typically be monitored in a hospital general ward, except in the convenient and comfort of the patient's home. And we do this remotely, we do this wirelessly, we do this 24/7, and we do this in real time. And when combining this with our clinical services, we've been able for the first time to offer patients and their doctors a viable and safe alternative to a hospital general admission.
Amazing, that really is amazing work. In the context of like trying to delve deeper into the broad categories of SDGs, Hila, I wanted to ask, in the context of achieving zero hunger, how do you envision the role of technology and emerging AI innovations, and how close are we to harnessing these advancements to make significant progress to actually achieve zero hunger worldwide?
So I think, there's a lot of developments in artificial intelligence. We're all seeing it. And I think, to me, how do you make it attainable to the people that we serve? I think many times we fall in love with the technology, but not with the problem. And I think the startups that we've seen and teams that we've seen succeed the most are the ones who really understand the reality of the people for whom they're solving. And we really preach on human-centered design in our team. And there's two examples that I like to give. One startup that we're working with is called Ignitia. So they take AI to gather a lot of weather information. What they do is, and that's a lot of AI and computational power, but what they do is the advice that they give to smallholder farmers is it's simplified and operational. So the back end is very fancy, but the front end to the user is very usable, gives them guidance, advice, and it's really helping giving farmers like very specific local. So if there's a storm, if they need to plant, it will help the farmer know, do they need to plant earlier? Do they need to harvest later? All this, do they need to water more or less? All of these things. But it just needs to me, like it's not only about the technology, it's the interaction of the user with the technology. Another example that we have with AI is something I like to share the open source work because I think it's then, you go and check the code and use it. We have a wonderful project that we've done with Google called Sky, S-K-A-I, and it's about taking mapping disasters. And we can see, we take satellite imagery before and after a natural disaster. Imagine the earthquake that happened in Turkey and Syria earlier this year. For us as WFP, as first responders, we want to bring food trucks to people that are in a devastating situation. But sometimes without AI, we would just send a truck and then realize that a bridge has broken down and you can't use that route. So now using Sky, what we can do, and other partners are using this as well, we can take information that would take us in the past 3 weeks to assess with human eyes. We can do it now in 48 hours. This helps our responsiveness be much quicker and solve a lot of different problems that humanitarian actors have. The great thing about it is open source, so now other actors have used it. We know for one case, for example, in the Caribbean, where there's an NGO called Give Directly that used this open source technology and did they do a lot of cash type of support, quite immediate. So they took something that we developed in Google and used it. And that's where I see the power of technology is like amplifying the good. And it's just, I think really it's not only about the technology, it's actually about the problem that it solves.
Amazing, thank you. And Swati as well, like you're at the forefront of investing in impactful organizations addressing climate issues. You gave us an example of one of them. Could you shed light on more tech-driven examples that are addressing climate issues more broadly from the work that you've been involved in?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we could be here the whole rest of the afternoon because one of the wonderful realities of our time is that there's never been a better time to be a climate tech entrepreneur, to be building a solution in this space. That was not true 10 years ago when I started doing this. I think there was a moment 7 or 8 years ago where Insight was maybe the 3rd most active seed investor in climate technologies in all of the United States. That is not a superlative that I wore with pride. It was actually because very few others were mobilizing capital into the space. But as a result of some of the historic regulatory action and public funding in the United States, there's been an explosion of funding and creative energy that's going into the space. And I see all kinds of world-class entrepreneurs who are choosing to get back into the arena as repeat founders or first-time founders, building amazing businesses. Some categories that I think I'm particularly excited about are actually what's happening in sustainable agriculture and food, our sort of food systems transformation globally and especially in the United States. My husband actually has gone back to start a second company right after we had a second child, not the best timing, focused on changing consumer behavior in the household around food waste. The idea here, the climate angle is that greenhouse gases means that we've got to tackle more than carbon. Methane is a really important one, and one of the biggest contributors to methane emissions globally is green waste. It's when you throw a banana peel in the garbage, or when we mow the lawn and we haul the lawn clippings off and they sit in landfills and they emit methane. The idea is the best way to prevent that is to actually remove green waste from our traditional trash flow and repurpose it, reuse it, put that energy back into the food system in a more direct way. So Matt's company is called Mill. They're tackling it that way. I recently invested in a super talented team of roboticists who are using AI, artificial intelligence, human intelligence, and machinery to help farmers. The idea here is that for actually specialty crop farmers around the world, as there's pesticide resistance is growing, and we also just want to reduce generally our reliance on pesticide. There's labor shortages also in agriculture. They're using solar-powered robots to till weeds out of crop rows. I'm not a farmer, but I'm getting to learn how farming works. And they're also collecting row-level soil data and row-by-row data for farmers, too. So there's a really interesting data angle and application there, too. So those are some examples. Food systems, software plays also that are helping businesses get smarter about how to make better climate choices has been an area of tremendous activity. And I'm still really excited about all the potential in hard tech. In fact, here's a company that I think some of you might be interested in. A few alumni from DeepMind, so with strong ties here, have actually built a business that we've recently been able to support called Orbital Materials. So the idea is that they use generative AI to speed up the process of potential new materials discovery for applications here in carbon removal, but they combine AI as a tool with their physical sciences team to put those suggested materials through their paces and testing to understand their characteristics and which ones might actually have the potential to be used in scaled applications, which I think is super cool.
Amazing. No, I really like that plethora of examples that you gave, especially one that advocates for the fact that they're more than carbon dioxide or methane as emissions to consider, because I've spent my whole PhD fighting for aldehydes as an emission that needs to be also considered. So I'm glad that there's incentive and work being done on that front. One of the good things about the SDGs to call for global prosperity, one of the blocks is actually looking at partnerships. And I would like to direct this question to Gina. It's impressive that there are 91 social innovation teams with the UNDP across 115 countries. How do you use technology to play a role to foster the partnerships between these different teams and foster collaboration? And what is the role of technology to be effective in this?
Well, this is another one, huh? He's got these giant questions. Well, I mean, okay, broadly, I would just say we work with a lot of partners. We work with, of course, universities and startups and departments, computer science departments and anthropology departments. We work with informal associations of, farmers or waste pickers. So partnership is really key. It's basically our scaling mechanism because the labs that we have, they run experiments, they run kind of quick and dirty experiments. They're prioritizing speed over rigor. So these are not the big randomized control trials that are going to change big amounts of public budgets, but they give you a sense, right? Speaking of methane, I know you're from Zambia, right? Yeah. In Zambia, I know one of the experiments we ran showed that more frequent waste collection does a better job than financial incentives of getting people to segregate waste. Right, so that kind of thing, it has nothing to do with technology, but it's, it's an experiment. You need to know the answer to it in order to design something. So partnership largely are kind of our model of scale. I really like some work that's been done in South Sudan. It's sort of a surprising one. South Sudan is like the least banked country in the world. I think it's less than 3% of people have bank accounts. So if you want to do business, it's all cash. Which creates a lot of security concerns, not least for women who have particular security concerns in that environment. Our lab came in and looked not first at technology. We have kind of an ethnographic capability in each lab. So they looked first, for the anthropologists in the house, there are a few of them. I'm married to one, so I'm well trained. But we looked first at kind of what are the community processes and practices going on here that promote trade and particularly cross-border trade with Sudan, between South Sudan and Sudan. And we came across this group of women who, it's a custom, they basically pool any extra money they have in a literal box, and then there is a chair and a treasurer and a secretary, and they all have to literally open the key, you can imagine the digital application here, to loan it out to somebody who they know who, has had a medical emergency or wants to buy more chairs for their tea stall and has a plan for how to pay it back, that sort of thing. So they looked at this practice, they developed it into code, and then South Sudan's first mobile money company has then built out a service line out that, like a group wallet, which is then kind of growing access there. So this is sort of one way that a partnership with the South Sudanese company is helping us take things to scale.
That's amazing. It's good that you're taking advantage of this and addressing that as part of your program as well, which is really impressive. Zikho, I wanted to go to healthcare and think about the role of technology in healthcare, but not only how it can be, how healthcare solutions can be technologically advanced, but are they also equitable? How can these solutions be equitable? And what are the strategies and considerations that you have to ensure that the healthcare technology actually reaches and benefits a diverse set of population?
Sure. What we find that works really well is to think about these questions at the very beginning, because what that allows you to do is, at the very beginning, start thinking about, for example, your data sets and whether they are inclusive and contextually relevant. And to your point around accessibility, what it also allows you to do is to think about how you can structure your business model so that your whatever you're producing is accessible to the populations that you are seeking to serve. What we find that doesn't work as well is when you go off and you develop these elaborate, expensive technologies, and then you try to factor in accessibility at the back end of that process. And sometimes, even after the fact, when the technology has already been priced for a particular market, and then trying to sort of reverse engineer that process to think about accessibility. To bring it closer to home in terms of how we've approached it in my own organization, we have, for example, partnered with companies like MTN, which is one of our largest telecoms providers, to make sure that the question of connectivity is not an impediment for our patients. And if you think about our business model more broadly, our vision is pioneering premium healthcare solutions that are more accessible and affordable for everyone. So at the outset, we centered quality alongside accessibility in our business model, and we have consistently rejected the idea that the two are mutually exclusive.
Like every technology startup should start with that. I think that's very important. So thank you for sharing that. Hila, I wanted to touch upon there's a sort of intricacies between the SDGs, and they have relations. So you can look at SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, and SDG 10, reducing inequalities. How do you and the Innovation Accelerator decide on what solutions to prioritize over the other, and how do you expand this? What's the criteria and set of strategy you use to make this decision?
Thanks for the question. What we do is we run different innovation challenges where teams can apply from around the world. So we really, and different challenges have different criteria. Sometimes it's a topic. So last year we did a very big a climate challenge, and we really got really strong startups. Some of them I've already mentioned today. Recently, we just did one on humanitarian topics and supply chain. And what we do is we look at the startups. We really look at the team. I think something that's very important for us is a team. We don't usually fund individuals. We fund teams, and we look who is part of the team. Is the team diverse in terms of their capabilities? Is the team diverse in terms of its leadership? Do they know the local problem that they're trying to address? So that's super important. We also look with teams that already have traction. So it's not that any team can apply. We want to see that they already have results, because working with us, we're a big organization. We're like a venture capital arm of a UN agency. So we want to make sure that the team can deal with our complexities. And really we want to see their implementation ability, because we really want to go beyond the ground and running with them once we give them funding. So that's the way that we assess teams, depending on the call that we do. And I think it's really, you want to actually check that the team also really understands the problem. So we will really go into things that you don't always think about in impact innovations. We ask about the business model, because I think we are in, and I hope this is the phase, and I know there's also a session later on impact investment, which I will join. It's like there's a world of grants right now, and that's a pond. If we want impact innovations to scale, they need to be investable. Private equity, VC, investable, and that's part of our journey also as we matured as an accelerator, is preparing startups to be investable. And I think that's where also those three big challenges that you mentioned that are quite large, the more we will be able to scale in these types of innovations, the more problems we'll be able to tackle, and funding and capability of teams is going to be key for that.
That's very interesting. And I think this might piggyback and go well with the next question that I have for Swati. On when you do invest in startups, how do you assess it in terms of business returns versus social and environmental impact? Is it mutually exclusive, or is there ways to think about both? Because when you start thinking about scale, if you think about return of investment, it's always monetary, but how do you quantify the impact metrics, and are you thinking about that?
Great question. I have a very particular view on it. I am an impact investor with the small I. I am not an impact investor with a big I. And what I mean by that is there is a school of impact investing where the investor puts an onus on the company on reporting on particular impact metrics. Because I focus so much on early stage work, my funding is usually focused on what you'd call pre-seed or seed stage businesses that are really focused on the 0 to 1. There's usually an idea, an entrepreneur, maybe 2 if you're lucky, and a few people that are kind of volunteering and kind of getting paid on a team by the time that I'm looking at something and considering investing. So we don't put a big responsibility on the team to commit to particular impact metrics, also because from my experience in entrepreneurship, you don't always know exactly what the impact is that you're going to have. You don't know what the avenue is yet at that point, and I think it's really important to enable these teams with some flexibility and freedom and capital to figure that out. But what we do is really ensure that they would pass what we call the average person test. Could I walk up to an average person, explain to you what this company is, what product they're building, and can you and I agree that the world's going to be in a better place if they are radically successful? Cool. If we can both do that, this is probably something that we should consider capitalizing if the tech is legit, and if also, I spend a lot of time diligencing the founding teams. We have, we use this more crass phrase that I won't repeat here, but we really look for ethical people who are kind and nice and not unsavory. So we put a lot of value into the people that we are tasking with the deployment of a technology to ascertain how likely they are when in moments of tough decisions, to stick to their values, their guns, and the intended impact of that technology. I think that's really important. It's something that I talk to my founders a lot about, especially my climate tech and my biotech founders, that you have to understand what your mission and purpose and values are in starting this company. Does that come through when you explain to me what your motivation was for putting your time and talents into this work? And does that show up also in who you try to have around the table as you're building? Does that show up in the investors that you prioritize on your cap table? Does that show up when you are interviewing and making your early hires? People that are also going to be owners in your business because they're getting equity. So it's a lot more of this qualitative assessment. I worry sometimes when we go down the path of really intensive measurement of impact, because I think we get away from the human side and the conversation around values. You can have the best measurement tools in the world, but if the people that you're supporting aren't deeply anchored in why they're building something, there's no guarantee that it's going to have the impact success or, frankly, the business success that makes it a worthwhile investment. I think in the best cases, I have posted phenomenal returns, financial returns on my investments, and they have had tremendous impact. I think Heirloom Carbon, the company that I was just talking about, is going to be one of those examples. Kindbody is a company that I invested in the healthcare space. Gina Bartesi really believes that women's healthcare in the United States needs to go through a fundamental transformation. She is likely going to take that company public imminently. It will be a phenomenal return, but it will have really done something for fertility care and women's access to healthcare in the markets that she's delivering that service to. But I think it really came down to focusing on what her values were. Mm-hmm. I think a bigger thing in all of this, and I'm just going to drop this nugget out there, but we won't resolve it today, is something that you alluded to that is super duper important, Hila. To date, this is the Technology and Society Forum, but we have really talked about a single model of the deployment of technology. For the most part today, the model that is most celebrated is a capitalism engine behind technology. We talk about founders and CEOs of businesses as the delivery mechanisms for technology and impact. And I think that's something that the panel up here might have a really interesting and important perspective on. But there are benefits to that, and there can be real limitations. And I would suggest that if we want to talk about the transformational potential of impact in technology, we need to also think about how we re-engineer capitalism.
Amazing. Thank you. Actually, to that point, Gina, I'm sure you would be able to enlighten us on the sort of grassroots innovation perspective.
Capitalism?
Because last night you were mentioning over 6,000 different innovations that you're able to map out at a grassroots level, and it might not be the most, it's not AI, it's not fancy technology, it could just be a small thing that could help a person in that situation. So do you want to elaborate on that, how it doesn't have to be a business with a co-founder and an approach that way, but innovation can be otherwise?
Definitely. Yeah, we work a lot with, so what we try and do with our lab network is learn from women and men who are living in poverty, facing the effects of climate change, right? Trying to grow crops under massive weather variability, et cetera. So this was kind of a big accomplishment for us setting up the network, was to create 91 full-time jobs to learn from the people we're trying to help, right? So that was kind of massive in its initiative attempt. It does show us that it's a little bit of an anti-Schumpeter story, that innovation doesn't only happen in firms, right? It's not that businesses do it and the customer takes it or leave it. Actually, a lot of innovation is driven by people solving problems for themselves. There may be a bit, a viable business model to that down the road, but it's actually just solving problems in the moment. So one such story that I like thinking about is our lab in Lesotho, nearby South Africa. We tell them kind of go out and just learn and see what women and men are doing. What are their innovations, right? What are their inventions? What are the practices out there that we can build on? They found a farmer whose land was less eaten by locusts than the others around him. So they started talking to him, and he said, "Oh, it was like really the penicillin story. I stepped on this elegant grasshopper. It smelled really bad. I noticed that the land around the carcass of the bug was less eaten by other bugs than where he wasn't, right? So I mixed it with water, and now I use it as a pesticide alternative." So our Accelerator lab, the UNDP Accelerator lab, came in, and they brought in a partnership with the National University of Lesotho, who validated, does this have insect repellent qualities? Yes, it does. In fact, it works better than the chemical alternatives on the market. But that farmer, now the question is where we are now, cut to now, may or may not want to stop being a farmer and now open a pesticides business, right? He may or may not want to protect that idea with a patent. He certainly may or may not even know what there is to protect with a patent, right? He's growing his crops in the best way he can, in the least cost way. So the scaling of this doesn't always take a commercial avenue. Right? I agree with you that there's much more money in venture capital than there is in grants. However, it's not, I think when we think about scaling, we get frustrated with global problems because we're like, why is it not going viral, right? There's all these ideas out here and we should be able to solve this. We were smart enough to get into this problem, we should be smart enough to get out. But the routes to scale might be through government policies, right? It might be more like the form of scaling that I like thinking about is not so much like scaling out like replication, but scree scaling. So I don't know if any of you are like rock climbers, but scree are the little rocks that like form the side of the mountain. They either form the mountain itself or they cover the mountain. So when you think about scaling, it's not the replication of one app or business that goes viral in social, development work. It's many small ones that have the same goal. And so it's a little hard to talk to investors about thinking of scale in that way. They want to see the one idea that went viral, but we try and think about it in that way.
Interesting. That's very different opinions, but like same approach. I think fostering innovation at the end of the day is key. I'd like to go to Zikho and sort of, I can notice the time is running out and almost Q&A time. So just my last question. As there's a lot of young people in the audience and people that want to have impact on the SDGs and use technology if they can, what is your career advice to get into this? How did you choose to become an entrepreneur? And please enlighten us.
Okay, so most recently my master's supervisor said, as lawyers, we specialize in bringing the rain to every parade. So I'm going to stay true to that this morning and resist, I guess, the urge to paint an overly rosy or romantic picture. I think the first thing that I would say is that this is incredibly hard work, but I imagine you wouldn't be sitting here if you were put off by hard things. And I think the nature of the work itself, Varun, is a bit of a slow burner. So if you are after instant gratification, this is probably not the work for you. And I would say to that point, it is, I would say, really important to seek out patient investment, given the nature of the work that we do, typically requiring entire overhauls of systems and a lot of heavy lifting. If you don't have alignment at an investor level, I think it will create a lot of stress and misalignment of expectations down the line. In terms of how I got myself into this position, I am one of the lawyers that pivoted. And the reason why I found myself in this space is because really I was after a life of purpose. I found in Vuyani, my co-founder, who is, I guess, a darling of this institution, a partner in crime, and someone who, like me, believed that first and foremost, the private sector should not be absolved from trying to find solutions for the challenges that we face. And secondly, that there is immense potential for entrepreneurship to solve a lot of the intractable challenges that we have. And the last thing that I would say is, if you are wanting to embark on this work, you do need to embrace a level of uncertainty, and I recognize that that is somewhat of an oxymoron, but it is a reality of the work that we do. And just to end on a positive note, because it's not all doom and gloom, if you do stay the course, I think you'll find that this is probably one of the most rewarding and fulfilling journeys that you will ever embark upon, because there really is no substitute for waking up in the morning and knowing that the work that you do is positively impacting people's lives.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. That was very inspirational. I would love to ask all the panelists more questions, but I'm going to open it up to the audience. You can also submit questions online, and I'll try and navigate the system to figure that out. But could we have, yeah, the gentleman.
Hi. Hello. Can everyone hear me? Thank you so much for the talk, and thank you, Varun, for moderating that panel. That was super interesting. Sorry, my notes are so complicated. So my question is, these are very complex issues, and of course there are very positive impacts, but in trying to solve these issues, there are also some negative impacts, and I'm thinking specifically, you're talking about AI and machine learning and leveraging technology, and while these feel ephemeral and they feel kind of slippy and non-material, they are absolutely material realities. So I'm thinking specifically about kind of cobalt mining in sub-Saharan Africa and the dangers and the kind of difficulties of that, and often these negative impacts for very positive solutions affect the most disempowered and most marginalized communities. So I'm curious to hear how you think about kind of the negative impacts of your work, which is ultimately very positive.
Thank you. Is it directed to any of the panelists, or would you? Okay, perfect.
I'll take it for the team.
Okay, perfect.
One thing I wanted to share, I think whenever you work with innovation, you will also see that sometimes you have failures. And in one of our cases, and I think we also need to talk about failures, and I think we need to be, in all our work, I think we need to, it's part of it, it's part of the risk. We had a case of an innovation that we ran, and sometimes a startup is so in love with their innovation, right? And maybe they come also sometimes from maybe a more privileged background. You know, you never know. But then they didn't communicate to the farmers what could be the bad result if the innovation didn't work out. What was the cost of putting their time into the innovation instead of doing their work in the regular way? And it was something that we learned early on. So now when we assess teams and when we propose solutions to the communities that we work with, we discuss this point, like, this is the opportunity cost that might happen if you work with our innovation. And it's not an easy conversation, but I'm happy we learned it in the beginning of our journey. And sometimes, and you assess that, you have to assess, because I think really sometimes innovation and startups and this culture is very hyped. And we need to like sometimes take like, wait, let's not fall in love with innovation. Let's take a pause, look at it, and assess. So we do it, sometimes it's easier. But also sometimes I will say there's cases that you miss. I don't want to like represent a perfect world. Yeah.
Thank you. Do any of you want to add to that? Or?
Add to that.
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
maybe just to say, yeah, I think, I'm glad you raised the question, because I think it's not only that, is there a dark side to technology, which I think we'll go into more in the afternoon, but it's also what can technology do and not do, right? I mean, there's the creation of more and more data does not necessarily mean better decisions, right? In fact, maybe somebody here is studying, I don't know, how it's going the other way. Because I don't think we can assume that better climate tech or better technologies in many fields is going to, let's say, make people in positions of power take the decisions they need to do, which will hurt some, and some of us in some moments, and others of us in other moments. Some people will lose jobs, things need to transition, we need to change our lifestyles, we know all of that stuff. So this idea that we kind of produce this data and we give it to the decision makers and they're gonna, in their good faith, make all decisions based on evidence in a time when, you know, falsehood moves 7 times faster than truth, right? And people who are under more and more of a burden of just trying to make ends meet may not be holding policymakers to account on making the decisions that are better in the longer term. So I think we do need to be a little, not just, you know, wary of technology, but also knowing what it can do and what it cannot do. I think that's really important.
Amazing, thank you for that. And it depends who's making the decisions as well, absolutely. Can we have more questions? One there and then one there.
Can they present themselves?
Yes.
Oh yeah, could you please say your name and affiliation and then your question.
Okay,
please.
so Paul Skinner, I'm here for myself. It perhaps builds on some of the last comments, but you know, arguably the UN SDGs don't include cultural renewal, but Agenda 2030 probably, or the fulfillment of it, probably requires cultural renewal. When in the earlier days of social media, a lot of people, myself included, were hoping that it would lead to a more mature conversation, more participatory democracy, and so on. But ultimately, it's ended up sort of separating us and creating higher levels of polarization that's allowed all sorts of awful politicians to prevail. How do the panel see today's changes in technologies playing out in terms of changing our cognitive and social and cultural environment? And will that take us closer to or further away from achieving Agenda 2030?
Thank you. Who would like to take that?
I will leave to you some of the specifics on Agenda 2030 and other pieces, but if I can maybe broadly interpret some of the spirit of your questions, I will again ruffle a few feathers with a perspective and suggest that I think one of the biggest differences between the innovation wave of the early 2000s, this kind of where social media and some of these other technologies that we've seen a longer innovation cycle on came out of, versus now, for example, if you look at the new arc that's emerging around public conversation on AI and sort of new emergent technologies in AI, I actually think one of the biggest, most important differences is that social media emerged from the black box of Silicon Valley innovation. It was a David to the world. And today AI emerges when the specter of technology stands more like a Goliath. There is much more public scrutiny and awareness of all of the pitfalls, as well as the wonderful, joy-giving, transformative potential of technology. I think that's a really good thing. I think there is, in the public consciousness and awareness, that there are more stakeholders in technology that ought to have a perspective, that ought to weigh in. I don't think it's a bad thing that we're having public sector summits on AI, that we are issuing executive orders, that we are starting to ask a question about whether or not regulation should move in alongside. I don't know that regulation fixes everything. I think it's a real problem when the regulators themselves hardly understand the technologies that they're regulating or the technologies upon which the technologies that they're regulating are working. But I think that's a really good thing. And if the trade-off is that the pace of innovation slows a little bit, that might be okay too, because I think one of the important insights over the last 15 years is time is a dimension in innovation. We need to see what technologies stand the test of time and how they play out over time before we decide, is it good or bad, or where on the spectrum in the middle does it fall? So that's kind of my 20,000-foot view offer, but I think you might have some more granular perspective.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it feels like there's two worlds, right? There's the world of, let's say, social media and what mobilizes people, right? And then there's this like world of jargon and this SDGs and the Agenda 2030, you know what I mean? And sometimes we hide behind that language to sanitize it so that then we can sit on a panel and not, get in trouble. I would say that the more you can tell stories that make sense even in those worlds of TikTok or wherever these conversations are happening, the better. We've mentioned, misinformation and information integrity in various forms. I do worry about that a lot. I think it's something that, again, most of what we do is premised on the idea that, we will make evidence-based policy decisions, right? And if there's no truth, then what is that, right? I know in our own work in the UN Development Program, we work with a lot of countries assisting during elections. We do see a growing number of countries where, in order to ensure a fair election, work on information integrity has to happen, right? These are not people who are sort of innovation techies who are interested in new things for the sake of novelty. These are people who are just trying to deliver on their electoral support, to governments. So it's definitely happening. I don't think that we have an answer in terms of like cultural renewal per se, but I would say just bridging those worlds between like the jargon of any jargon, whether it's tech jargon or global development jargon, and the way that people talk in the real world, that's possibly, that's going to help the most.
Thank you. We got two questions in the back there, please. Could we have them both, if that's okay? Sure.
Thank you for sharing today. As you support the advancement of technology that accelerates progress against Sustainable Development Goals, how do you recommend that people consider ways to couple their passion and commitment for this kind of work and the kind of work that you're all involved with the need to take care of yourself and look after other parts of your life so that you have the energy to continue doing the work for many chapters of your life? I'm curious what you think.
Thank you. And the following question.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. My question was to Swati. You mentioned re-engineering capitalism. I was curious to hear more about your thoughts on that, whether it is replacing the system entirely, is it tinkering around the edges, what could those changes look like?
Perfect, thank you. Should we start with the first one and then Swati? Anyone want to take the first one? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the first one, although I do have to say it's a very difficult question. And it's particularly close to my heart as a founder. Because as founders, I think what we find is that the expectation, sometimes even from our own investors, is that we basically need to live in poverty until the company reaches a particular point where it can then reward you for your sweat equity, as we love to call it. But I do want to be responsible in the advice that I give. I think the reality of the situation is both me and my co-founder had to wait a while before we were in a position where we could take this risk. So I think you do need to consider your personal circumstances. It will be difficult in the early stages of your business, and you will not get immediate rewards for the effort that you are putting in. But as I said, if you are able to, I would encourage you to do it, because the rewards, at the end of the day, will be immense, and we are reaping those rewards today.
Thank you. Swati, would you like to take the second question?
Sure.
You can say no.
Don't have a choice.
No, I open this, so we're going to just take a little dive down this rabbit hole. So my preface here is that I actually identify as an idealistic pragmatist, which is a very tough position to be in because it means you're never satisfying the idealists and you're never really satisfying the pragmatists. But I live in this happy little place in the middle. And so, when I talk about re-examining and starting to re-engineer capitalism, I think it is most pragmatic to look at where there's already momentum and to lean heavier in that direction. So there are, for example, afoot in the United States, some really interesting and exciting things a little bit behind the scenes. The SEC is contemplating rules changes, language changes. We are looking at requiring the reporting of metrics and of data in public company filings around more than profit. And I think that's really exciting and really important. And you have seen a normative movement in that direction from the B Corporation movement 20 years ago that has hit a crescendo and is even taking on more momentum outside of the United States than it is in the United States. At this point, you've seen it with the growth in impact investors that are kind of creating side markets with companies that are reporting on these numbers. And there is a big debate happening, but certainly positive momentum in the public market settings headed in that direction. Those are all really, really good things. And I think potential avenues for more and more change. I also, so that's what I'll say. It's not a complete re-engineering of the system, but I think it's really important and positive direction. And the rest of it, to me, is still an open question. This is not an answer, but I'll tell you something that I grapple with. We had an explosion during the pandemic, as I mentioned, of capital, private capital that was going into climate technologies. It was a really good thing. In fact, even last year, seed stage investing in climate tech companies and the first part of this year was up 20% year on year. That's remarkable because we've had a major macroeconomic slowdown in that same period of time. But what's happening? You have some of the world's best talent, as I mentioned, stepping off the sidelines, sometimes coming back into the arena to do the hard work of creating and building, risking their mental health and all kinds of other things, their sweat equity, to build these businesses. And interest rates are rising because we're worried about inflation. Interest rates rising are a really blunt tool. So what's happening is founders that are going up, maybe not for their seed rounds, but for their Series B rounds, their C rounds, the already really awkward in-between phases where you don't have the growth metrics that private equity or sort of later stage investors are used to using to evaluate and de-risk your technologies. You don't have those metrics. It's even more complicated because you're not building an enterprise SaaS business. You're building really hard technology businesses like Heirloom with their facilities, their factories. And where is the capital for those middle stages? Well, here's the thing that drives me nuts about that. You have major managers like the BlackRocks and the TPGs of the world who have raised historic amounts of money during those boom times for climate tech investing. They're collecting management fees on those funds. Are they deploying capital? Nope. You're a founder. You have bills to pay. You're trying to build these technologies. These managers have told the world we are raising historic amounts of capital to fund the world's movement to clean tech, but they're not deploying. So that's a question, not an answer on the re-engineering capitalism thing. I think we can use short-term tools to just make the system that we have work better, work in a more honest way, in a more accountable way, and still have lots more to show for it than we do now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I think on that note, as much as I would invite more questions, it's time for lunch, and I don't want to be the person in between you and lunch. So you can take lunch at the Lightwells, and there's also a concurrent workshop that's on cultivating your personal and organizational brand with Shukri at the Glass Pavilion from 12:45 to 1:45, and you can take your lunch in there if you'd like to. But I'd really like to welcome everyone to thank this inspirational panel with. Thank you.